Hello, Tennessee Voices viewers and listeners. This is David Plazas, the Opinion and Engagement Director for the USA Today Network Tennessee and the Tennessean. Today, I have the pleasure of having as my guest Dr. Vann Newkirk, the president of Fisk University, the historic and oldest university in the Nashville area. It's been around since 1866, and I'm excited to talk to Dr. Newkirk about his role as president and his vision. Dr. Newkirk, how are you doing today?
I am fine and enjoying the weather before our snow.
Absolutely. We are recording this on March 11th. It's been a beautiful 60-some degree day, except that this evening it will be quite cold and wintry, possibly 1 to 6 inches of snow, if I understand correctly.
That's correct. So we're enjoying while we can enjoy it.
Well, talk to me a little bit about your role in assuming the presidency of Fisk. You're relatively new to the role, and when you decided to come on, what was your desire and what was the challenge ahead of you?
Well, you know, I've been with the university roughly 4 years, and I'm closing out my second year as president of the institution. But coming on to this role as president of the university, you know, we have had a lot of challenges at Fisk. Fisk, as you know, was an institution that was art rich, but financially poor, didn't have any money. And because of that, we've had a lot of issues with our accrediting body. So coming to our university and building the infrastructure that we needed to move forward and to get people to have confidence in this university, which is a historic institution, but had a lot of issues with our accrediting body were issues. And so we had to figure out the best way of doing it. So becoming president, we launched a whole process of building confidence in our in the university, building confidence in the people who work at the institution, and making sure that we could overcome some of those accreditation challenges and challenges in the leadership, which had, I think we're at the fourth president in 10 years, and making sure that we've got that stability. And I think those things people are beginning to buy into, and we begin to see that our university is on the move. We've got the highest enrollment we've had in nearly 15 years. So all of those things are working out, our fundraising, and we feel that we're on the way to what I want to say greater heights.
You know, I remember the first time I'd heard of Fisk, you know, from many different shows and everything, but in studying the civil rights movement, that's where Fisk very prominently came in recent memory to many people. And Fisk has an amazing legacy of training leaders of tomorrow. Could you talk a little bit about that legacy and what that means to you?
Well, our legacy is so important. I came here first time as a consultant in 2001. And as soon as I put my foot on the campus, you could feel this, the past actually coming to you. You know, people like W.B. Du Bois, the statues right on the front of the campus, Ida Wells, John Hope Franklin, John Lewis, all of those came to this university. And they came because of what we represent, social justice. We played a big role in this whole social justice movement and improving the rights and the ability of mankind, not just for African Americans, for mankind. And so when we think about students who come to this university and students who seek out Fisk University, we're a small university of 1,000 students. We have students from 42 of the 50 states and from 12 international countries. And because of what we've done in the past, as you know, W.B. Du Bois is laid to rest in Ghana. We have a large contingent of students from Ghana who come to this university to study the skill sets of social justice and equity. And they take that back, and we believe that we are actually contributing to is world change, not just American change, but world change, because those students become leaders. And as they become leaders, they begin to influence what happens in the world in which they live, not just in America. So we think that we are a world changing institution that's a small institution, but with a powerful hammer.
That's very powerful. And one of the things that I've been discussing a lot with colleagues and also my own writing is the issue of narratives and what is history. You know, we're at a time where we went to a racial reckoning back in 2020, but we seem to be getting a lot of pushback from states, including Tennessee, that are saying you can't study divisive topics. How do you process that, and what is your recommendation when it comes to how to assess our history and learn from it?
Well, I think we have to be true to make sure that history as it happened is told. You know, I'm reading a book right now that's called Forget the Alamo. It's by Brian Burrow. And that book is one that's a revisionist, some people would call it revisionist history, but it's a history that talks about the Alamo wasn't about 200 men who fought for the freedom of Texas. It actually was about slavery and people who were scoundrels who actually went in to take the land from Mexico because they wanted to actually have slavery. They wanted to have slaves who actually do the work because they felt that their economy was dependent upon slavery. The Mexicans who lived in that area and the Mexican government, most were opposed to slavery. And one of the reasons that you have Santa Anna coming up with his army was because of this whole issue. And over time, we see this whole narrative of the Alamo being revised, and it's revised to show that Santa Anna is this tyrant who's coming up to fight these people who were fighting for freedom, these Americans. And so, this whole narrative has been turned upside down in the historical context, even if we look at that 1960 panoramic movie by John Wayne, The Alamo. And so if we look at this institution, Fisk University, and the history and of the past, we have to tell the story, and the story has to be told as to why we came about. For example, in the early 1900s, there was a book put out by the Phelps Stokes Fund, Thomas Jesse Jones, who was director. And he had this belief that if he could put this book out that talked about Negroes and industrial education, that's the only education that Negroes needed, because they were not ready for liberal arts education. And liberal arts education would get them to thinking too much. With Fisk University, we balked that trend. We taught liberal arts education. And this institution struggled for it in the early days because this Phelps Foundation was very, very rich. They put a lot of money into this book and these publications. And many of those schools who they actually wrote against that were liberal arts went out of business. But we survived, and we survived because of the quality of education and that we were teaching people to think. And so if you go back and look at history, I think history, we have to put the whole narrative out, because sometimes as narratives are shaped and changed, like this Phelps Stokes Foundation in this book that's called Negro Education, for years, it put this whole story out that the Phelps Foundation was enhancing Negro education, but it was enhancing a type of Negro education and a type of education that didn't fit the narrative for the majority of African Americans in our country. So we have to tell the whole story and as to why this was coming about. And it was coming about because there was a particular narrative that fit within the foundation scope. And that was that Blacks and African Americans or Negroes, however you want to call them for the period, were inherently inferior to whites. And this is something we never believed at this university. And this is something that this university has moved forward as we go into this century.
And I hope that people will take a chance to go to Fisk University and visit right there on 18th and Jefferson Street area. And I mean, it's a beautiful campus. And I'm especially impressed with, you've mentioned the art at the beginning of this conversation, just the Carl Van Vechten Gallery and the Aaron Douglas Gallery. They're global treasures. Nashville is a gem to have Fisk in there. And what is your pitch to people who are either looking to work for Fisk or looking to study at Fisk as to why they should choose your university?
Well, I'll tell you, you choose this university if you wanted to study here because we have a one-of-a-kind kind of education that you're going to get. Our faculty, we keep our institution small purposely, and our faculty are able to do a lot of one-on-one things with our students. We're also able to connect our students with all types of alums and opportunities. For example, we have Nikki Giovanni, who's an alum of the university, who walks our campus quite frequently. We have people like David Levering Lewis, top-ranked historian who graduated from this university, who's back quite often. We've got Beyonce's father, who's an alum of our institution. So you name it, we've got alums who've come from this institution. And what our alums at this institution are really famous for is that they like to give back and be on our campus. And so it's quite frequent that we can have a politician who walks the campus, politicians like John Lewis, who shortly before he died was right here on this campus interacting with our students. So I believe coming to this university, you get a one-of-a-kind education, and an education in which you are going to be enhanced and influenced by world leaders and by people who actually contribute to our societal changes. They're right here on this campus. And we're continuing to produce more and more of those societal leaders. And it's no wonder that because of that, when our graduates leave this university and because of their aspirations, we have one of the highest incomes for students who've been out of school 3 to 5 years in any school in the nation. I think a study that we recently did, it showed that the average income was about 73,000 3 years out of this institution. And that's not by accident. That's because of those connections that our students are able to make, and because of the small class sizes, and because of our history of producing leaders.
You know, the last time I was on Fisk campus for a beneficial event, it was when Ibrahim Muhammad's art came to Fisk, the Fisk University, the beautiful jute sacks that were around the little theater that were there. And so just to see that dynamism and the art that was there, to see, and he himself is from Ghana, you'd mentioned that because of W.B. Du Bois's legacy. When you're on campus, it almost you seem very excited. I mean, just even to be around the campus itself seems to have a special energy, I think.
Well, I think so. You know, here's the one thing that you always would love to think about our institution. We're an institution of first, you know, the first HBCU that was accredited, the oldest institution in Nashville, the first permanent college building in Nashville, Jubilee Hall is right here on this campus. First HBCU to have a Phi Beta Kappa chapter, the first HBCU, and this is our most recent first, to have a gymnastics team. But, you know, right on this campus, we have one of the few copies of the Slave Bible, which is a historic relic, but it left out many pieces of biblical translation because it was designed to teach slaves how to be good slaves. We have a copy because that's important for research, for people to know who they are. There we go back to one of our earlier questions of telling history as it occurred. We have a great collection here of all types of historic artifacts that are in our library that people would not even imagine the wealth that we have. We talk about African-American music. We have a music collection that goes back all the way to the late 1890s, that right here in this institution, those recordings are important. And so we believe that this university, because of those type of artifacts and because of the art that we have in the university, we have a very unique, I want to say a unique place here in this city, that if anyone comes to this campus, not only will you get a chance to feel it, but I think you can get a chance, if you are interested and have enough time, to actually touch it and see it and to become a part of it.
Well, thank you very much for that invitation. Before we continue on this conversation, I always like to ask my guests if they would share how they have been coping during this pandemic. Leaders often have a lot on their shoulders and they don't often take as much time for themselves as maybe they should. But what are you reading? Well, you mentioned one of the books you're reading about Forget the Alamo, but what else are you reading or watching or doing just to keep healthy and sane during this time, even though it seems like we're finally out of this, the worst of this pandemic?
Well, you know, I'm a writer, and that's something that's been very important for me and my family. I have a son who's a journalist, and one of the things that I've been doing during the pandemic, I'm doing a lot of research about movement of peoples along the coast of the United States. And, you know, I'm doing some research on that. And I think that's really important to actually let me have some relaxation time to sit and look at an important window of American history that's not been written about. And that's important for me. And then beyond that, I do a lot of meditation. I think when I'm on my deck and outside with nature, I think those are two of the best times that I can have, cold weather, hot weather, whatever it is, to have those 15 to 20 minutes to myself to meditate and think about the day's activities, because it's a good way of winding down and to giving yourself that time that you probably need just for yourself. So those are some things that I've been doing, is just give myself that breathing room and the time that I need to decompress and to recompress to get myself ready to move forward at this university.
Well, thank you for sharing that. You know, one of the things that we alluded to, but I definitely want to mention is the Fisk Jubilee Singers, the now Grammy award-winning Fisk Jubilee Singers, for which Nashville is known as Music City. Would you talk a little bit about the legacy and how you've seen its past and how you see its future as well?
Well, are you talking about the Jubilee Singers? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I think our Jubilee Singers, that is a treasure that, you know, that we cannot be so we're very thankful for our Jubilee Singers. And I think our students and all the time they put into this effort. And I think we're beginning to get more recognition than we've had in quite some time. They'll be in Carnegie Hall quite shortly. They're making travels over into other parts of our country. They were at the Los Angeles Lakers a few weeks ago to give the national anthem. And I think all of those things are important because as they've always done, they're providing the world a view of our institution. And that view of our institution is important, especially if we look at what's happening in our country and what happened on January 6th, 1 year ago, because they're bringing our country together by the music of the past and the music and of what they're doing to actually introduce new genres and new audiences to our genre of music. And that genre of music is a music of peace. It's a music of harmony. And I think that's important as we begin to see if we can repair those bonds that have been broken in our country to make sure that our country remains a solid and stable place in this world that has so many fractures.
Going back to that whole theme that we talked about earlier of history, for the young child and his family who is struggling right now as books may be removed from the classroom, how do they get the optimal education when it can't always happen at school? What would you suggest?
Well, one of the things that we're doing right now is that we're reaching out into the community to help students who need that additional help. I mean, we have even students on our campus who don't have optimal internet and optimal connections. And a lot of things that we're doing is trying to use outreach right here in Nashville. We're doing outreach in Clarksville and some of the communities around our city to help our students. And what we're also doing is urging our alums. We have a network of alums all over this nation to do some of the same outreach. I think that's important for us because we want to make sure that we have a face of our university, a face of who we are on those young people that we're helping to get the educations that they need. And I think we're urging other providers, school systems, we're urging churches to do the same thing. And we're playing that role, and that role is going to help us to actually take our outreach tenfold to folk who need it and to get our students the education that they need during this time of pandemic and this time of educational gaps.
One of the final themes I want to talk with you about is collaboration with other institutions. You and I met at an event that I moderated with you and 4 other university presidents at Belmont University last fall. And for me, it was really interesting because I hadn't seen this level of dialogue and cooperation before. And what are your hopes for what this dialogue brings to the community as a whole?
Well, what I'd like to see is that we have a Nashville consortium of institutions who are actually cooperating, designing programs and collaboration so that we have this seamless process of education all across our city, higher education. And we've already seen a lot of that with some partnerships that we've had. Fisk was one of the first innovators along with Vanderbilt. We've had a partnership with Vanderbilt since 1967. And it's the Fisk Vanderbilt Master's to PhD program in which we educate students. They leave Fisk, they go over and get their PhD at Vanderbilt. So they have a master's from here. And we think that's important. We're doing similar programs with Belmont. We hope to do similar programs with Trevecca and with Lipscomb because we believe that if we're going to have an educational system in this city and in this state that's second to none, we've got to collaborate. We've got some of the best institutions in the world right here in this city, right here in Tennessee. And what we've got to do if we're going to make that educational system that we have in this system, this city and this state, one that others take notice of. They already notice a few of our individual institutions. We've got to use the power of all to become one and generate that across our nation. And I think that's going to allow us to do those things. We're talking with some of the other institutions about our Social Justice Institute. Just before I got on this call with you, we were talking with people over at Belmont about some of our students and student exchanges into this Social Justice Institute because we believe that it has value all across the city and all throughout our other institutions.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Newkirk. It is such a pleasure to have you, the Fisk University President Vann Newkirk. Before I let you go, I always like to ask my guests if they would leave our audience with some words of wisdom to help them get through this time.
Well, I believe in patience and perseverance. Patience and perseverance during this time of challenge. I think that's the best way to get through and to move forward. So those are my words of wisdom.
Thank you very much, Dr. Newkirk. May you stay well and healthy. And again, I'm grateful for you appearing on the show today.
Thank you again.